Chris, could you start by giving our viewers a short introduction of yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm Chris. Go online by the name of Reassembler, and I guess I've been in my spare time working on loads of retro projects over the past 20 years. Many of them OutRun related, some of them not.
Yeah. Do you remember the moment you first got hooked on computers or arcades?
Sure, yeah. I actually remember watching a BBC TV show here in the UK when I was a child, and I think it was a BBC Micro they had on there, and they had they just had someone, and I remember this really clearly, like just putting a 5 1/4-inch floppy disk into the drive, and then a program loading, and I just thought, this is just so cool. So I immediately asked my parents for a computer, and I think it was for my birthday, maybe like my 7th birthday, but the computer, or maybe my 6th birthday, the computer they bought me was a secondhand Spectrum 16K with the rubber keys. So, it was pretty limited. I spent a lot of time typing in programs from magazines and books that didn't work, a lot of time loading games that often crashed and didn't work, and just generally being a bit gutted I didn't have the 48K model, which is the one that could really run all the software that was available. So yeah, that was my first machine. And I, obviously back then you turn on the machine and it just says Sinclair Research and you can type commands in. So I spent a lot of time writing bad basic programs, like that would draw pictures and ask you your name and tell you things back, started programming really early, like 6 or 7 maybe, but my maths was terrible at that age, so I couldn't do anything sophisticated. It's very basic stuff.
Okay, arcade cabinets, what first got you interested in restoring those?
Well, I guess you got to go back, you're probably sort of my generation, and back in the 80s the gulf between the arcade and home was just so vast. Like I remember going in and being on holiday with my parents and going into an arcade, seafront arcade. You'd see games like OutRun and Star Wars, the Vector Star Wars, and they were just so mesmerizing compared with what you could play at home. So going into the arcade was just always fascinating. What are you going to see next? Every few years it felt like the technology was really moving forward graphically, in terms of the creativity behind the games, just loads of things. So obviously going back to the Spectrum, I think by the time OutRun came out, I'd upgraded to a 128K Spectrum by then, and obviously well documented the version of OutRun on the Spectrum wasn't really all that great, although to be fair to the developers, I think they did a good job, all things considered, with the limitations of that hardware. So I was always fascinated by like the arcade and the tech behind the games. Like, how did these games work? What was in them? It was all a bit of a mystery. So late 90s, when I first got on the internet and migrated from like the BBS scene, one of the first things I did was get on the arcade video game collectors news group and just started asking about, has anyone got an OutRun machine? And a guy had one. It was still in use. It was in use in a kids youth club, and he said, yeah, sure, I'm after 200 quid for it. And he drove it to my parents' house in a van. I didn't tell my parents it was coming. They were pretty annoyed. They're actually very annoyed. I did part exchange an Apple II at the time I had for it, and then it stayed in my parents' garage, and I used it for probably a year or two. Then I left home, went studying, and finally, when I was a bit older, I had a bit of space, so I brought it back, fully restored it, stripped it down, electronics, spraying it with paints, buying new side art, all that kind of thing. It was a very rough machine anyway. It had a hard life, and that's sort of really what got me into it. And then one thing led to another, and before long I was like decompiling the code of the game because I wanted to make enhancements. And I can't resist tinkering with this sort of stuff. It's always it's just fun.
I'm guessing I don't have to ask you what's your favorite cabinet.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's OutRun, but You know, I've got a soft spot really for all of the early Sega AM2 Yu Suzuki team titles from that era. Really, like, they're sort of fascinating when you look back at the history of those games. The teams that made them were super young. Like, a lot of the guys on the team were, you know, it was a team of people who were, some of them were just teenagers, you know, they're like 18 years old. They were just sleeping under the desks. Space Harrier, apparently, I think the dev time of Space Harrier was just a few months. You know, they were turned around super quickly, and very kind of anything goes style. It's quite, you know, compared with game development today, which is so I guess kind of mature in terms of how it's approached and the business considerations and all that sort of thing. It really felt like back then it was a very exciting and kind of entrepreneurial time, even at a larger company like Sega. So yeah, all of those games and the Japanese games fascinate me because, you know, as a kid, you didn't know who made any of these games. It was all a mystery. Where, you know, who are these guys? Like, where are these games coming from? How are they being made? Why are they so much better than half the things I'm playing at home on my
Okay, what's usually the most challenging part of a restoration?
I mean, it's teaching yourself things that you don't know. So you've got a combination of whether it's the physical stuff, like, okay, well, how am I going to get this piece of metal work welded together? Because I don't know how to weld. You know, how am I going to replace this circuit board? Am I going to kill myself trying to repair this CRT? So yeah, I haven't done any restoration work for a while now, just because all of these machines kind of work, and that's fine. And I've tinkering with Sonic at the moment, but I have got a pinball machine I was actually given, which is outside my house in an outbuilding, and that's probably my next project. It doesn't need a huge amount of work, but it does need a big strip down. And I don't know much about pinball. You know, I used to repair the machine when it was in the office I worked in, but it'll be a nice learning experience. I like doing things that I don't make, maybe just a bit outside my comfort zone. So that'll be the next challenge.
Are there any machines left that you're still dreaming of finding?
No, because I don't have space. It would be, you know, one in, one out, and I kind of feel I've got enough retro junk already.
Probably.
There's boxes, you can see there's boxes everywhere, stuff in my attic. I had a massive clear out over lockdown. You know, I as a kid, you know, I was constantly going to boot fairs, like secondhand sales in the UK, and back in the sort of mid 90s, early 90s, there was just so much so cheap. So I used to have like 20 Spectrums. I had multiple Amigas, STs, consoles. You know, you were picking this stuff up for £10, £5, like nothing. So I ended up with a lot of stuff and got a lot of time, like a lot of people, I guess, our age. You've got a job, you've got kids, you've got your hobbies. So you start thinking, when am I actually going to get to computer number 25 to fix it? The answer is probably never. Just get rid of it, sell it.
I know the feeling.
Yeah.
How many arcade machines do you personally own?
Just the ones behind me. So yeah, they're all original. They're all running original PCBs and things like that. The Bubble machine, which is like an Electrocoin Mini, which was a very common fish and chip shop arcade cab. That can run the original Jammer boards, or you can just swap in, you know, a modern PC or Pi device if you want into that one. I was working with a friend of mine called Smarty. He made a really cool PCB replacement for Sega dedicated arcade cabs. It's called Smarty Pi, and it enables you to put, like, for example, Cannonball that I worked on, which is the 60 FPS OutRun, back into the original cab. And it has lots of, it's a really nice, like, plug and play PCB project where you can just literally unplug all the original connectors, put the new board in, and it's a direct replacement. You don't have to cut any wires, you don't have to mutilate your cab. So yeah, that's a really cool project. A friend of mine worked on. It's worth checking out online.
Back to OutRun, you worked on several related projects. What makes this game so special?
I guess nostalgia. You know, for me, like, I love my music. I always really love the soundtrack for OutRun. I thought visually the game is just super appealing in terms of the brightness and the color palette and the wealth of graphics. You know, back when I first saw it, they still had black and white games in the arcade, you know, because it's easy to think, oh, you go back to 1987 and you're going to see a load of games from that era. But actually, you know, most arcades, a lot of games in there that were 5-6 years old, pushed to the back. So you still had black and white racing games, I remember. So you see the new games at the front and just think, wow, they're awesome. So it's the visuals, it was the sound, and the replayability of it, and the simplicity. Like, I think it's really, really difficult to make a great, simple game that you can just play and play and play. A lot of games are very overcomplicated.
Yeah.
It's the same with music. You know, the art of writing a very simple piece of music that's also excellent is a real skill, and one that not many artists have. So I think I appreciate that about OutRun. Whereas, you know, when you look at, say, Afterburner, arguably that's a little bit overcomplicated in comparison, and there's like detail and noise in that game that doesn't need to be there. I still love it though, but yeah, it's not as perfect.
Talking about music, what's your favorite OutRun track?
For me, I think it's Passing Breeze. A lot of people say Magical Sound Shower, but yeah, Passing Breeze for me.
Yeah. Back to the code. How did you first begin analyzing the original arcade code?
Yeah, so what I effectively did was I loaded up into IDA or IDA, which was a debugger.
Yeah.
And what I really did was I took the memory map for the game from MAME, I think I got it from, and then I started looking at where the game was writing to text RAM. I thought a good place to start would be like, well, where does it write, you know, press start button to the screen? And by starting there, you can start like analyzing, okay, well, this bit of code's probably doing this and this is probably doing that. And I was often, you know, just running through it in the main debugger and just line by line, slowly commenting it over a very, very long period of time. So it's super manual, you know. I was referencing the memory map, I was referencing debuggers, I was teaching myself how 68,000 worked and how it was structured, and I really wanted to understand how the game is made. I didn't like have like a super clear end goal. I was just curious, you know, and I thought this would be a just an interesting little project to do for myself, like teach myself what went on behind the scenes and how was this game built.
What was the first major mystery you solved in the code?
Lots. I mean, you know, finding out like exactly how the scoring worked was interesting. Finding unused graphics, finding an unused sort of prototype test track was kind of cool. Finding like places in the code where things have been started and not concluded. For example, traffic. I think at one point they were going to have traffic coming towards you as well, maybe on some of the levels, and that was removed and never used. So yeah, there was a lot of stuff just in terms of like unraveling the secrets of the game, I suppose, and just seeing what was there. I mean, it's not a game that's huge on Easter eggs, and most of the well-known ones are quite well documented online. But yeah, it was interesting to find out what was going on behind the scenes.
Okay, what motivated Cannonball originally?
Yeah, so Cannonball, I thought, well, now that I've got the understanding of the code base, wouldn't it be cool to be able to manipulate it more easily? Now, before I actually did Cannonball, I had done a hack for the arcade machine called the Enhanced Edition, which I did with a couple of other people originally. And that was done in a way whereby the code was almost hijacked. So I'd look for a place I could inject new code into the ROM and jump out of a particular subroutine into my new location and then do all the manipulations there. It wasn't like a full recompile from the ground up. It was almost like quite hacky in terms of how I did it, but you know, works fine. Whereas Cannonball was like a ground up rewrite. And by doing that, it was very easy to add things like widescreen mode, 60 FPS, extra functionality, because the code base was slightly cleaner, and obviously it was running on a modern PC, so you didn't really have to worry about performance to the extent you would if you were modifying the original code.
Did you preserve original bugs intentionally?
Yeah, there's a mode in that, so you can enable some of the original bugs if you want them. There are quite a lot of bugs in OutRun. Same with pretty much any
Yeah.
game or commercial piece of software once you really dig below the surface. But some of those bugs are quirks that people need. For example, the timing of OutRun isn't actually correct. It doesn't adhere to real world timing. I think that was fixed on the Switch version. I was never going to fix that, but because I think M2 might have fixed it. So I kind of wanted parity with the original game and the M2 version, so that you could choose which method you want, because it does impact the scoring and a lot of other things as well. So yeah, some of the most notorious bug for me is the sprite zooming bug, where there's a lookup table used. Sprite zooming in OutRun is effectively predefined. There's about 5 predefined sprites of different sizes, because the hardware can only zoom so much, and it goes through a big lookup table which sets values like the zoom value and things like that. So it's a combination of software and hardware. And one of the values is wrong, and once you see it, you can't unsee it, because as everything zooms towards you, there's one frame where it pops to the wrong size. So yeah, it's details like that you start spotting and look into these things.
How do you decide what can be modernized without losing authenticity?
Yeah, sometimes it's just down to what you personally think fancy doing. One oddity really with all of my OutRun projects, and there's obviously Cannonball, there's the enhanced edition, and there's the Amiga version.
Yeah.
They all have different extra features. There's no parity between them. A lot of it is just down to, hey, what did I fancy doing at the time? You know, there's not sort of like a big overarching scheme or anything like that. So really with the arcade version, some of them were cosmetic things, where if you've got the machine in your house, you want a good free play mode, you want high score saving, you want some of these things that the original arcade machine didn't offer, and a better service menu, you know, just to change all the settings. So some of them are just like ease of life modifications.
What would you consider the ideal version of OutRun now? Is it one of your ports or the original?
I think, you know, that is just down to the person playing the game. Like, I personally have all the recent versions. The one that interested me the most was the 3DS M2 release. The reason being because it was in 3D. So that was like the first time that an innovation had really been brought to the game, and it's just a really cool experience. Those super scalar games in 3D are really, really fun. Like, it's definitely worth checking them out and playing them if you haven't already. So that was the version that interested me the most. Like, any version that I've worked on, I've spent so long looking at it that by the time I'm done, I'm like, no more of that. You know,
of course,
let's go and do something else, right? So yeah, it's kind of cool to see what other people have come up with over the years, and I like the M2 port, I think.
Okay, over to the Amiga for a bit. At what point did you think, I'm going to make OutRun run on the Amiga, and why?
Yeah, well, I got, you know, as part of this clear out of retro stuff, I got rid of an Amiga 600, but the A1200 I really liked, and I thought, you know, why have I got all this stuff stuck in my loft? You know, I'm not using it. So I got the A1200 out and, you know, started modifying it, and added an accelerator, added a modern IDE drive, added a GoTech, you know, tinkered, upgraded, you know, programmed new Kickstart ROMs for it, put you know, WHD load on there, started playing a load of retro games, and I was like, that's fun. And then I was like, well, what next? And I then thought, well, you know, I started looking at some of the tools that people were building for the Amiga, and because it has such an active scene, there were you know, there was assemblers, there were VS Code plugins, there was a lot of cool stuff, and I thought, well, this is really interesting. The tooling is great. Like, let's see what I can do. And I thought, well, I've got the OutRun code, which is 68,000 codes decompiled. I understand it all. And I just thought, it's like an experiment. Let's see if we can get some of it running. I didn't really know where I was going with it. Was I going to finish this project? Was it possible? So yeah, little by little, I got things up and running on the Amiga. And yeah, I knew there was the legacy on the Amiga of everyone was a bit disgruntled about the port of OutRun they got. So I thought, well, let's try and bring a version to the Amiga that is as close to the arcade as possible. And, that was really interesting and somewhat, maybe even somewhat controversial. There's a lot of people out there who think it should have been a pure A500 port, but hey, it's a hobby, and I'm going to spend my years doing what I want to do. And for me, the appeal of OutRun is the graphics, the sound, everything just being spectacular. It's not it's not condensing that game down into a A500 version. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I leave that door open for someone else in the future. If you want to go and do it, then go and do it. It could be a fun challenge.
What was the biggest limitations on getting it to run on the Amiga?
Well, I think for OutRun, it was, and this isn't a limitation for a lot of Amiga games, but for me, it's like the bit playing format, right? Because effectively, you've got an entire screen of data that needs to be refreshed every frame because of all the sprite zooming, because unlike a lot of games, pretty much everything on the screen changes every single frame. So that led me down a route of doing chunky to planar, so that you could almost address the screen in a more, let's call it, traditional way, or like a PC would with Doom or something like that. But then you've got the overhead of running that routine in software to perform that per pixel conversion. And even though those routines have been massively optimized over the years by people who are far smarter than myself, they still take an awful lot of CPU time. So most of the time on that port goes towards just the pure graphical conversion of chunky to planar. The thing is, there's so much overdraw in OutRun. Like everything overlaps each other. Even 15 years ago, I've worked in game devs and chatting to other Unity devs about it. They were sort of saying, this would struggle to run on a lot of mobile hardware back then, just because of the amount of rendering that was being done. So there are, aside from the ease of sprite zooming and addressing data on the screen, like chunky to planar really was the way to go with that. But with Sonic, because I'm targeting the A1200 as a first attempt, that will be purely bit plane based and much more tied to the OG original Amiga hardware.
When doing the OutRun port, what did the Amiga unexpectedly do well, if anything?
Well, the Amiga is incredibly flexible, and I think that's why it's still such an attractive platform today. It often can't do a singular thing as well as another machine. Like, for example, the Genesis Mega Drive sprite and tile hardware is far superior for that style of game than anything the Amiga offers. But the Mega Drive is also a much more restrictive piece of hardware, even though it's it's a console, obviously, so it's not a computer, but actually internally, like the Amiga, because you've got the copper, because you've got the flexibility of how you can program the blitter, because just sort of like the number of different ways you can use the Amiga are its strength, I think, but also its curse as well, because a lot of the time, a lot of these things don't all work together. So part of the big challenge of doing Sonic is really figuring out, well, which of these components, like you can make a demo and you can see them working in isolation, and that's cool. But it's also misleading. It's misleading. People will see these demos and say, hang on a second, this person has done this technique. Why aren't you using this technique? And sometimes the answer is you need to try that technique, which can be very time consuming, and then see, is it going to work with everything else that I'm trying to do simultaneously? And often the answer is no, or the answer is yes, with some major caveats. And it's really, when you're building a very complex code base up, it's down to, can I handle dealing with this for the rest of the project? Is this just going to be a total nightmare to work with? So, the process of Sonic at the moment is a lot of experimentation. I listen to what everyone has to tell me, but I also need to see it for myself. I need to try things for myself, because the circumstances can be very different based on your project. So that's like a very long answer to your question about the Amiga. Like, fascinating machine, very capable, but it's also a very general machine. It can do a lot of things well, but I tell you what isn't one of them. It's like moving data around quickly. The speed of memory on the Amiga, chip memory, is atrocious. Like, nearly all the challenges on Sonic based around moving data as fast as you can and finding ways to do it that keep the game running fast. So yeah, that's the big challenge.
What compromises were unavoidable for the OutRun port?
What compromises did I make? There are some changes to the palettes. The original OutRun uses many thousands, but they're subtle. I obviously bordered the screen slightly, top and bottom, so that the HUD's a little bit different to minimize the amount of the screen it needed a refresh. I actually lowered the amount of traffic. It plays on easy mode, although it's still relatively difficult. The arcade version, you can really ramp up the number of cars if you put it in hard mode. That was for performance reasons. I tried to really optimize the code base as much as I could, but at the end of the day, like, architecturally, if you're just trying to software scale that many sprites, that is really your bottleneck. It's not like micro optimizations of parts of the code base, as fascinating as they might be.
What did it feel like seeing OutRun running smoothly on a real Amiga hardware for the first time?
Well, the most interesting experience actually was going to one of the Amiga meets here in the UK. And it, like, almost everyone had OutRun playing and running on an Amiga in this room, and it was a little overwhelming because I'd spent a year and a half or so just coding it myself, and I was sort of like, it was a very insular experience, right? Like, it's just you and the machine, and you're just talking to people online. And I posted a few videos and stuff of the progress, but then you go to a meet and it's just like all I could hear was the music blaring out and the game running and that kind of thing. So that was mad.
That must have
it was
been
also
great.
like, one thing with going to the Amiga meet was just realizing just how sort of modified a lot of people's machines are. Almost everyone there had very high-end Amigas. Some people had Pi accelerators in them, all sorts. So yes, it was pretty eye-opening, and good to chat and meet a lot of people who had worked on projects, hardware, software, everything. Really cool.
Okay, over to Sonic. You are working on that port to the Amiga as well. Why Sonic?
Well, I think, firstly, you have to love the game to want to spend that much time on it. Secondly, I thought this was going to be a very different type of challenge to OutRun. I wanted to target original Amiga hardware this time round, and I thought, Sonic is a very fast game, and it's clearly Sonic raises an interesting question, right? It's one of those titles where it's like, can the Amiga do it? Can't the Amiga do it? So that's ultimately the question that we've got to answer, I think. And it's definitely not easy. Like, I've been working on it in my spare time for 6 months or so now. And, we're really only still doing some of the fundamental basics of the levels and the rendering. The amount, like, if, like, porting a game these days, if you're a modern dev, right? Like, you get the code, C-based code base, or whatever it's written in. You might have to plug in a few libraries for your target platform. You can often have something up and running in a couple of weeks. This is sort of like going right into the heart of the beast. And it's like, how is absolutely everything done in this engine, from building up the tiles, the scrolling, the object management. And Sonic is a pretty complicated piece of code. And it's then thinking, how do I hijack this? How do I manipulate this to work on the Amiga and be performant without creating bugs, without making this difficult to work with. Like, you know, the logic and stuff, the game logic, how Sonic behaves, the physics, the collisions, that sort of thing, they could just be taken wholesale. That part of it's really, really quick and easy. The difficult part is, you know, the scrolling, the blissing of all the sprites and that sort of thing. And it is, you know, when you actually just do a quick transfer of the game and you just see how slow everything's running, it's like, holy moly, am I ever going to get there with this? Is this even possible? Is this just like, is this whole project just completely insane? So yeah, it's Sonic's like a real challenge, and I think I've made it more challenging on myself as well by kind of covering the progress on a regular basis, which means that I kind of feel the pressure really to have something new to show on a monthly basis. That's like that's super challenging, because you know, software development like this, it's not like linear. You don't have it's not like every month it's like, oh, I've done another level. Like, really how it's going to pan out is there's like months and months of hard graft, and then suddenly the levels will probably come really quick, because, you know, once you've got all the components in place, like putting another level in is not that much more work. You know, it's just data and making sure you've supported all those functions. So yeah, Sonic's a real interesting one. I think, you know, my plan is keep it on the A1200, make sure it runs in chip memory, but there is always an escape route, right? Like, if you end up thinking this is just never going to work, you use fast memory or something like that. So it's not like the work's ever all going to be wasted, but the real challenge of this project is doing it with chip memory, I think. Doing it with original hardware. If you were to, say, head down the route of like accelerator, fast memory, you know, it's probably a 3-month project, the whole thing. You know, I could have done it in half the time.
Before starting out, did you really believe it could be done? And now, after having worked on it for 6 or so months, do you believe it more or less?
It varies. Like, you know, there's ups and downs with all of these things. Sometimes, you know, I'm like, yeah, I'm like, yes, it's gonna happen. You know, like I get some part of it working, and it's like a sense of real elation. Other times, it is just pain. It is like pure pain, and you just think, I've got to rewrite so much stuff again. You know, just the scrolling a level on this project is remarkably tough. And the reason why it's tough is because you've got very, very large play fields. You can't keep all that data in memory. It's coming in dynamically as the screen scrolls. It's being built from a much more complex structure in Sonic. You've got 256 by 256 pixel chunks that then get subdivided down into 16 by 16 tiles that then go into 8 by 8 tiles. And you want to keep all the data intact because you don't want to have to rework everything, but at the same time, you know, just what's your strategy for keeping that performant on the Amiga? It's going to be very different to how the Mega Drive handles it. So you've got to study the original code, but then pretty much do a ground up rewrite of it.
Back in the 90s, Sonic on the Amiga was almost this mythical what if. Why do you think people believed it couldn't be done?
I mean, I'm not really aware of that. I don't know. Like, I don't know if there was a big conversation around.
But there was a conversation.
Yeah. Well, I can definitely see now I've started it, why there was a conversation about it. Like, and, you know, to be clear, like, let's look at where I am today. You know, we have, at the moment, I have level scrolling really well. But I only have Sonic as a sprite on screen and some rings. And I've just spent nearly a month optimizing that sprite code. So just the sprite code is nowhere near finished. I've put in like sprite caching layers. I've put in, I've unwrapped the way the Mega Drive was streaming the data from cartridge into the VDP because Sonic's frames are changing each time round. So like, it's just a massive re-engineering project. And yeah, it is definitely not like take this 68,000 code and inject a few new graphics routines and it's going to work. It's super, super tough. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether it is possible or not. Regardless, like, no matter how far I get with this project, like, I'll release the source code to this, and maybe others can even make enhancements and improve it further if they spot things that I've missed along the way.
The Amiga and the Mega Drive are both using the same CPU or CPU family, but they're radically different machines. What's the biggest architectural difference between them?
Sprites and tiles. I think that's the biggest thing. The Mega Drive can just handle a lot of motion, a lot of movement, as long as you play into its strengths and you target its hardware in the way it's intended to be targeted. Just so many things are solved for you in a very easy way on the Mega Drive, like making screens scroll, nice placement of objects with transparency, multiple layers of graphics that can be interchanged. It's all very simple. As a developer on the Mega Drive, like, it's very easy. I was thinking about this a while ago, and I can't think of many Mega Drive games that started on the Mega Drive and were ported to the Amiga. Most of the ones I can think of are the other way around, like the Bitmap Brothers stuff, the Sensible Software games. And I've seen the code base for some of those games, and they pretty much, the Mega Drive's just running the Amiga code with a couple of different files for the graphics rendering, and the Mega Drive can handle them with ease, really, because it's got very fast data access to its VDP.
Yeah. Is there one area where the Amiga version can never fully match the Mega Drive?
Well, I think the big challenging thing is just going to be the number of objects that are flying around the screen. Just blitting that number of transparent objects is, mathematically almost verging on impossible when you actually start looking at the maths. So I'm starting to think about, for example, like re-editing the levels, not to change them at all in terms of how they play, but actually to add extra like data to the level objects, and almost as an optimization. So for example, if a ring is placed on the level, rotating ring that you would collect, like rather than sort of like adding a flag. So what you do is you'd say this ring does not have the foreground behind it. Because it doesn't have the foreground behind it, I can then blit it with a D to A blitter operation without the transparency, and I don't have to restore the playfield after it's drawn. So if I go through the level and tag all those objects in that way, that's another optimization that we can potentially find for the Amiga. And you've just got to keep going and find more and more of these things. Each week is like, right, what am I going to optimize next? What can I think of? What tricks can I think of to try and make this run faster? So that's like the challenge. There's it's just continually finding new tricks that you can shave CPU cycles off with.
I'm guessing you get a lot of feedback. Has community feedback changed the direction of development any?
Well, not so far. That's just because I'm still working on the nuts and bolts and the basics. But there have been a lot of really cool ideas. I think a lot of people are keen to get the Sonic Spin Dash in there, which was in Sonic 2, but not Sonic 1. That's really easy to backport, so that's not much work at all. There were other things like, for example, actually the rotating special levels, you can have them rotate more smoothly on the Mega Drive with a cheat. It changes the gameplay though. So having some of these options, I think, in the Amiga version will be really cool, as well as just giving people things like, level selects and stuff like that outdoor without having to use 1,000,001 strange cheat codes like you do on the Mega Drive version. Theoretically as well, we can also have the debug mode level editor type thing in there. I've already got that ported. So in theory, you can like kind of make your own basic level on the Amiga version too, just like the Mega Drive one. So although I don't know how that's going to handle if you just dump loads of rings everywhere, it's just going to be so slow. Oh my goodness. So yeah, you could probably cause a lot of destruction with that. But I think there's plenty of room for doing lots of interesting things with Sonic. I'm a bit less with Sonic. With OutRun, it's like my holy shrine. It's like it has to be a particular way. With Sonic, I'm a bit more like, if we need to make changes and things, then we can do. Make that version feel a bit more unique to the Amiga, maybe than OutRun, which was more of a clean port.
You don't have to say it, but in your head, do you have a release date for the game or a demo?
No. Oh, I have an idea. Yes, I do want to do a demo. I don't know when it will be. I think the demo is really like when the first level is playable.
Yeah.
So, and it's not just so that people can play it. It's actually kind of for selfish reasons, for my benefit, so people can try it on different hardware, tell me it crashes, provide feedback, find bugs and that sort of thing. So yeah, like that I did one for OutRun as well. And the OutRun one was when I had it at a point where the sprite zooming was working and you could like just not play a level, but actually scroll through a level. So I think we have to go a bit further with Sonic. But yeah, when a level's sort of playable, I think it'd be great to get a version out there.
Anything else you'd like to add on the Sonic port, or should we move on to the next subject?
Well, if you haven't already, just check out some of the videos I've been making about it, and then you can join the journey and maybe cheer me on or tell me that it's completely impossible, depending on your point of view. But yeah, let's move on then to the next thing.
Yeah. If you had to choose CRT or mod on display, what would you choose?
It depends on the situation. I mean, for arcade cabs, I think you've got to keep the original CRTs in them. I think it's sacrilegious to swap the CRT out. But you know, on my desk here, you know, I run my Amiga through a OSSC into a modern monitor. So yeah, just whatever works for you, really. Like I'm not. Just keep those arcade machines intact. That's my main message.
Original hardware or FPGA?
Well, I'm a big fan of emulators. So, you know, like actually my uni project, when my dissertation was a Master System and Game Gear emulator that I coded. So I've always loved emulation. I've always been really fascinated by emulation. But for me, it's like, I like software emulation. I'm not really an FPGA person. There's a lot of talk about the FPGA stuff. At the end of the day, it's still an emulator.
Yeah,
it can be done well. It can be done badly. It's not necessarily better or worse than software emulation. Potentially, you might have a little bit less lag, but a lot of the modern emulators are so great nowadays that it's not really an issue. Emulators give you awesome debugging facilities as a developer, or the ability to understand how software works under the hood. So I love that side to them. But I also love hardware as well. So, you know, I've got my original Amiga next to me here. Obviously, all the arcade cabs use original hardware. So both. No, I'm just gonna have a cop out and say both. But I'm not really an FPGA type person.
What do you consider the most underrated arcade racer?
The most underrated arcade racer? Oh, I don't know. I can think of a lot of overrated ones.
I'm sure you can.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like there's a lot of ones that went under the radar a little bit. I think maybe even Outrunners as a sequel is a bit underappreciated, and some of the titles that came at the end of the 2D sprite scaler era, just because around that time, because the move to 3D, every other cab was probably a Sega Rally or a Daytona. There were some titles at the end of the System 32 Sega hardware run that were very cool. Yeah, like Radmobile as well was another very impressive game for the time. All of those sprite scalers, like Power Drift, for example, is not really underrated, but super impressive in terms of how they really created 3D worlds just purely out of sprites. It's a real sort of like interesting time. The end of that era when 3D was coming in, but 2D had reached its pinnacle, and the hardware was fantastic. The game design was fantastic. Yeah, it's just really, really cool era, I think.
Okay. Favorite Amiga games or the games that you found most impressive?
Yeah, my favorite Amiga games are probably the ones that are pretty much native to the hardware, or developed for the Amiga. I think all of the stuff from Bitmap Brothers has a great combination of nostalgia for me, artistically as well, people like Dan Malone did a fantastic job with a limited color palette there. And, you know, Speeble 2, I loved Speeble 2, fantastic game. Similarly with, you know, the Sensible stuff, Sensible Soccer, amazing games, just so much fun to play. Lemmings, you know, all of these.
Yeah.
There's just so many. You know, looking back now, you know, and this is kind of bizarre given I'm doing all these ports and stuff. The stuff that really just doesn't resonate for me are a lot of arcade ports. You know, I had them on the Spectrum and PC and Amiga and all that back in the day, and so many of them are just naff, you know, because they weren't designed for the hardware in mind. And yeah, I think when you get the opportunity to design something from the ground up for a machine, you're always going to have really great results. Like if you look at the Lotus games, for example, because they played into the strengths and limitations of the Amiga hardware, they were really, really fantastic. You know, they had the ability to make design decisions that just made sense. Like if you look at how few colors the cars use in those games, just totally optimized, but they still look really good. Whereas if you were to try and use that same technique and bring OutRun and put it in the Lotus engine, it would be rubbish because the art just isn't made to look like that, you know. So that's what impresses me. I think, you know, the game's built from the ground up with the limitations in mind.
Okay, we're nearing the end part here. Do you think the internet has changed creativity for the better or worse?
Oh, well, I'm going to say both. You know, like with any technology, it can be used for positive or negative. I mean, I kind of feel for me, like there's just so many positives, like the ability to access information, to teach yourself about anything you want, the ability to connect with people. It's, you know, it's really just, the whole thing's revolutionary. And if you harness it and use it for good, it's fantastic. You know, everything has its ups and downsides, you know, computers, AI, all of these things, and everyone's got strong opinions about them, but it's down to you how you choose to use tools, technology. It's down to you how you choose to use your time, and you can try and use it for the positive and something constructive, or you can use it for the negative, and that's really down to you and your own like sense of discipline, I suppose, in terms of how you live your life, you know. So yeah, I think the internet's a good thing. Obviously, there's bad stuff out there, but there's a lot of bad stuff in the world in general. And part of the reason I think for doing these projects is more to, you know, I guess do things that are positive and entertaining and bring people together and maybe stimulate some healthy debate. You know, in a world where there is a lot of stuff going on that's maybe not so appealing or unsavory or whatever.
I was going to ask about AI, but you more or less said the same thing.
Look, AI is a really interesting one. I mean, I did, full disclaimer, I did my degree in AI like back in the late 90s when it was super primitive. You know, some of the concepts that exist today were a thing. Obviously, machine learning, neural networks date back a long time before that. But the whole transformer architecture, and I'm talking LLMs here, not the Hasbro franchise, wasn't a thing back then, just because there wasn't the same amount of data to be able to hoover up. So yeah, I've always been interested in technology. I've always been interested in AI, but it's also very controversial. You know, I think in my last YouTube video, I just whacked some image I just found on the net of their Sonic crying, and people were really upset about that because it was AI generated. I had no idea. I just found it on an image search. Probably should have just taken it. But it's like, well, that's like, you know, over the course of the month, that was like 1 second of my thought process versus many hours on the project. So yeah, you know, like I can see why people are apprehensive of new technology, especially when, you know, sometimes the individuals running these companies aren't particularly savory characters and morally sometimes a little questionable, you could say. So I totally get it. At the same time, also don't think, you know, you can stop the world and get off. You know, it's like, unfortunately, that's the way things are going, for better or worse. And I think these things could be used for positive or negative purposes. I'll give you an example of, you know, AI usage that's really helped me is actually just tool creation now. Like, for example, with Sonic the other day, I was like, right, okay, I've converted all these files to the Amiga. Wouldn't it be great just to be able to verify the correctness of the data in these files without actually viewing it in the engine. So really quick to write a tool and then just go, okay, I can check this with my eyes just instantly. Whereas, you know, probably 5 years ago, I'd have been a case of, it's going to take me a week to write that tool. Like, do I really need it? You know, is that a good use of time? So it, you know, it's not that you're ever going to get AI to port Sonic to the Amiga. It just doesn't have that in its training data. But there are like areas and things you can do to help you along the way with the project. And, you know, let's face it, if you're embarking on a project that's going to take you over a year of your time, you should harness everything you can, like people's knowledge that's out there, existing code, tooling that already exists. You've got to make use of the things available to you. Because you're effectively like you're doing something that's never been done before in the first place. So you've got to build on the great work that's been done by others, and all of these projects would be impossible without many great other things that people have done before. WinUAE, what a fantastic long-running
that's a great one.
You know, the VS Code Amiga assembly plugin, brilliant. You know, VASM, you know, all these passion projects written by people in their spare time. You know, it's really like I find all of it really inspiring and really fascinating. And you know, I think if anything, through doing these things, I'd always encourage people just to tinker and try things out. You know, whether it's teaching yourself to code, whether it's using AI for coding, whatever. You know, it's like if you're using it for something productive and it's making you happy, then go for it. You know, just do it.
Okay, if you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Well, there's probably a lot of bits of advice.
Only one.
I mean, I think, like, you know, when you're young, you have an awful lot of free time. So I think it would be sometimes like use your time for things that you really enjoy and use it as productively as possible, and procrastinate less would be my advice. I think as you get older, you realize how precious time is. You've got like, probably in our case, we've got family, we've got young kids, you know, maybe your parents are getting old, all that kind of thing. You know, you've got crap on your house to deal with, you know, oh god, there's another repair that needs to be done. All of these things that get in the way. And you realize, well, time is super, super valuable. Use it wisely, use it for good, and don't waste too much time, you know.
Okay.
That would be my advice to myself.
Yeah. Any shout outs, greetings you'd like to send?
Just really everyone who's supported the project and shown an interest. I think, you know, it's been really nice. You know, I appreciate your support on OutRun and with the testing. You've obviously got way more Amigas than I have, so well done. You've definitely got the most toys. Just really everyone that's given me advice and all provided, you know, tools that I've used along the way. You know, everything that I do is just impossible without the work of others. So there's a lot of unsung heroes, I think, in every scene, you know, like whether it's people that are tirelessly working away on tooling or running forums or whatever it happens to be. So yeah, I just, you know, probably the people I'd like to thank most are probably the people I don't even know their names, you know. So yeah, just thanks for everyone, really.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Thanks for taking the time, and good luck with your future projects.
Thank you. I'll need it. Cheers.
Okay, bye.